The shrill ring of my phone at 2:17 in the morning jolted me from deep sleep. My mother's voice cracked through the speaker, hysterical and desperate. "Gary, thank God you answered. Your brother Jake is in critical condition at St. Mary's Hospital. He had a terrible motorcycle accident and needs emergency surgery right now. We need $20,000 immediately or he'll suffer through the night and get stuck with all the medical bills. Please, you have to help us." I rubbed my eyes, still groggy, as she continued sobbing. "Your sister Amanda would send the money instantly if we asked her." Those words hit like a slap. "Call your precious daughter," I replied coldly, then hung up and went back to sleep. Sleep didn't come easily after that call. Lying in the darkness of my Denver apartment, memories flooded back like unwelcome visitors. Growing up in our suburban Colorado home, I was always the afterthought, the one who didn't quite measure up to my siblings' supposed brilliance. Jake, 3 years younger, could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When he crashed Dad's car at 16, they bought him a brand new motorcycle for his birthday 2 weeks later. Amanda, my older sister by 4 years, received a fairy tale wedding that cost my parents $35,000, complete with destination bachelor party in Cabo. Meanwhile, when I graduated valedictorian from high school, my parents skipped the ceremony to attend Jake's Little League championship game. When I needed help with college loans, Dad said character was built through struggle and hard work. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my computer science degree while watching my parents hand Jake cash whenever he asked. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was blatant and cruel. My ex-wife, Sarah, used to witness these family dynamics during our 5-year marriage. She watched my mother criticize everything from my career choices to my haircut, while praising Jake's latest get-rich-quick scheme. During our wedding planning, my parents contributed $500 while constantly mentioning how much more they'd spent on Amanda's celebration. Sarah finally exploded during one family dinner when my father interrupted my promotion announcement to brag about Jake's new bartending job. The tension from my family's treatment contributed significantly to our divorce 2 years ago. Now I have Lisa, my girlfriend of 18 months, who supports my decision to maintain boundaries with my family. She's witnessed enough phone calls and guilt trips to understand why I've distanced myself. Lisa works as a veterinarian and has her own healthy family relationships, which makes the contrast with mine even starker. She's encouraged me to stand firm against their manipulation, though she doesn't fully grasp the depths of emotional abuse I endured growing up. The irony of my mother's words stung deeply. Amanda, the precious daughter who borrowed $15,000 from me for her house down payment 5 years ago and never repaid a cent. The same Amanda who convinced me to co-sign her car loan, then defaulted, leaving me responsible for payments on a vehicle I'd never driven. Yet somehow I was always painted as the selfish one for setting boundaries around money and respect. As I stared at my ceiling, something nagged at me about the call. My mother's story felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced the words. Jake owned a motorcycle, sure, but he'd been posting on social media just yesterday about his weekend plans. I grabbed my phone and checked Instagram. There was Jake at a casino wearing a designer jacket I'd never seen, flashing expensive jewelry and grinning next to slot machines. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., just over 2 hours before my mother's frantic call about his supposed accident. My stomach dropped as pieces clicked together. Jake looked perfectly fine in those photos, healthy and clearly enjoying himself with money he shouldn't have had. The expensive clothes, the jewelry, the confident smile of someone who'd just won big. None of this matched my mother's desperate story about emergency surgery and mounting medical bills. Something was very wrong with this picture, and my instinct screamed that I'd just dodged a carefully orchestrated manipulation. My phone buzzed at 7:30 the next morning. Amanda's name flashed on the screen, and I braced myself for the verbal assault that was surely coming. I answered on the 4th ring. "You heartless bastard," she screamed before I could say hello. "How could you abandon Jake when he needed you most? I had to send the $20,000 myself because you were too selfish to help your own brother. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. Wait, you already sent the money? Of course I did. Unlike some people, I actually care about family. But I need you to reimburse me half. $10,000, Gary. I shouldn't have to carry this entire burden alone. Her words confirmed my suspicions from the night before. Amanda, what hospital is Jake at exactly? St. Mary's, obviously. Mom told you that. Which St. Mary's? There are 3 in Denver. A pause. The main one, downtown. Why are you asking stupid questions instead of figuring out how to pay me back? Have you actually seen Jake talked to him directly? Another pause, longer this time. I trust Mom and Dad completely. They wouldn't lie about something this serious. You're just looking for excuses to avoid helping. The defensiveness in her voice raised red flags. Amanda always attacked when cornered, deflecting with accusations, rather than addressing direct questions. It was a pattern I'd recognized since childhood. Amanda, I'm going to ask you something and I want a straight answer. When exactly did this accident happen? Last night around midnight. Gary, why are you interrogating me? Jake is suffering and all you care about is playing detective. But her timeline didn't match the casino photos. I'd screenshot Jake's posts, and the latest one was time-stamped well after midnight. Either Amanda was lying or someone was feeding her false information. After hanging up on her continued demands for reimbursement, I called St. Mary's Hospital downtown. The receptionist was helpful but firm. No patient named Jake Reynolds had been admitted in the past 48 hours. I called the other 2 St. Mary's locations with identical results. My brother wasn't in any hospital. Next, I contacted Marcus, Jake's roommate, from their shared apartment in Capitol Hill. Marcus picked up on the second ring, sounding groggy. Gary, what's up, man? Kind of early for a social call. Marcus, I need to ask you about Jake. Is he okay? Was he in an accident last night? Kotoy? Marcus laughed. Accident dude Jake left 3 days ago for Vegas with his new girlfriend, Crystal. He was bragging about some big score he had planned, talking about hitting it rich and paying off all his debts. Said he'd be back by Tuesday with enough money to move out and get his own place. My blood ran cold. Vegas. He's been gone for 3 days. Yeah, man. Left Wednesday morning in Crystal's car, all excited about whatever scheme he had cooking. Why, what's going on? After explaining the situation to Marcus, who was appropriately shocked, I hung up feeling sick to my stomach. My family had coordinated an elaborate lie to steal money from me and Amanda. But why would Amanda participate in scamming herself unless... My phone buzzed with a text from Brad, Amanda's husband. Gary, call me when you get this. Can't talk at home, but there's stuff about Amanda you need to know. Meet me at the Starbucks on 15th Street at noon if possible. Brad had always been the reasonable one in Amanda's life, often apologizing privately for her behavior during family gatherings. He worked as an accountant and had a reputation for honesty and integrity. If he was reaching out secretly, the situation was more serious than I'd imagined. At noon, I found Brad sitting in a corner booth looking haggard and nervous. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much lately. Thanks for meeting me, he said quietly. I couldn't say this over the phone or at home. Amanda's been stealing from her work. About 2 months ago, she started taking money from client accounts at the real estate office. Small amounts at first, but it escalated quickly. My heart sank. Amanda worked as a bookkeeper for a successful real estate company, handling thousands of dollars in client deposits and commissions daily. How much are we talking about, Brad? As of last week, around $47,000. There's an audit scheduled for next Friday, and she's panicking. She's been gambling online trying to win back what she stole, but it's only made things worse. She owes money to her bookie, maxed out credit cards, and took a second mortgage on our house without telling me. The pieces suddenly fit together. Amanda hadn't sent $20,000 to help Jake. She'd needed my contribution to help cover her own embezzlement before the audit exposed her crimes. My parents' emergency call wasn't about Jake's medical bills, but about Amanda's desperate attempt to avoid prison. Brad, does she know you're talking to me? God, no. She'd lose her mind if she knew I was here. But Gary, I can't be part of this anymore. Our marriage is falling apart, and I'm terrified we're going to lose everything. I wanted you to know the truth before you got pulled deeper into whatever scheme they're running." As I drove home from that meeting, my phone rang repeatedly with calls from Amanda demanding her reimbursement. I didn't answer. Instead, I began planning my next move, knowing that my family's web of lies was about to unravel completely. I drove straight to my parents' house in Lakewood, a modest ranch-style home they'd owned for 28 years. The driveway needed resealing, and the front yard showed signs of neglect that hadn't been there during my last visit 6 months earlier. I didn't call ahead. Surprise was essential for what I was about to do. Through the living room window, I could see my father Robert pacing back and forth while talking animatedly on his phone. I crept closer to listen, staying hidden behind their overgrown juniper bushes. "The kid bought it completely," Dad was saying. "Amanda already transferred her half, so we're sitting pretty either way. If Gary comes through, we split it 3 ways like we planned. If not, we still have enough to handle the immediate problem." My stomach churned as I heard my own father discussing me like a mark in some confidence game. I waited until he ended the call before knocking on the front door. Mom answered with red, puffy eyes and immediately threw her arms around me. "Gary, thank goodness you came. Have you reconsidered helping with Jake's medical bills? Every hour counts right now." "Actually, I'm here because I have some questions about Jake's condition. Mind if I come in?" Dad appeared behind her wearing the same fake concerned expression I'd seen countless times during my childhood, when he was about to deliver bad news that somehow became my fault. "Son, this isn't the time for questions. Your brother needs emergency surgery and we're running out of time. The doctors are pressuring us for payment." I sat down on their familiar plaid couch without being invited. "Which doctors, Dad? What are their names?" "Dr. Thompson in the emergency department," he answered quickly, "and Dr. Martinez, the surgeon. At St. Mary's Hospital downtown." "That's right." Interesting because I called St. Mary's this morning. No patient named Jake Reynolds has been admitted there. I also called the other 2 St. Mary's locations in the metro area. Same story. The color drained from both their faces. Mom sat down heavily in Dad's recliner, while he remained standing, his confident demeanor cracking. "Maybe there was a mix-up with the computer system," Mom said weakly. "Hospitals make mistakes all the time." "Mom, I also talked to Marcus, Jake's roommate. Jake left for Las Vegas 3 days ago with his girlfriend. He's not in any hospital." Dad's jaw clenched, a telltale sign that his temper was rising. Marcus is confused. Jake told him he was going somewhere else to throw people off the trail. He's been getting death threats from some dangerous people he owes money to. Each new lie built on the previous one, but their story kept changing. First it was a motorcycle accident. Now it was death threats and witness protection. I pulled out my phone and showed them Jake's casino photos from the night before. "Explain this then. Jake posted these pictures from a Las Vegas casino at 11:47 last night, over 2 hours before you called me about his emergency surgery." Mom burst into tears while Dad's face turned red with anger. "You don't understand the situation, Gary. Yes, Jake is in Vegas, but he's in serious trouble with some very dangerous people. They'll kill him if he doesn't pay what he owes." "How much does he owe Dad?" $30,000, maybe more by now with interest and penalties. "So you decided to scam me and Amanda for $20,000 to help cover Jake's gambling debts?" "It's not a scam," Dad exploded. "It's family helping family. You have a good job, no kids, minimal expenses. Amanda has savings from her real estate work. Jake is our son, and he's in real danger." The front door opened, and Mrs. Henderson from next door peered in. "Robert, Linda, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing raised voices. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Henderson was 73 years old, sharp as a tack, and had lived next to my parents for 15 years. She'd watched me grow up, and had always been kind to me, often commenting on how much I'd accomplished, despite my family's lack of support. "Everything's fine, Margaret," Mom said quickly. "Just family business." Mrs. Henderson looked directly at me. "Gary, dear, I hope you're not falling for another one of their stories. Your parents have been telling people different tales about needing money for months now. First it was roof repairs, then medical bills for your mother's supposed cancer treatment, then something about legal fees for a lawsuit. My parents looked mortified as Mrs. Henderson continued. They borrowed $5,000 from the Johnsons across the street for emergency home repairs that never happened. The Malloys loaned them $3,000 for your mother's surgery that she clearly never had. Poor Mrs. Chen gave them $1,500 after they claimed their car had been totaled. The scope of their deception was staggering. My parents had been systematically defrauding their neighbors and friends, spinning different sob stories to extract money from anyone willing to listen. Mrs. Henderson? I said carefully, "How long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months, probably longer. I started keeping track after they approached me with their first story about needing help with property taxes. When the same bills kept arriving in their mailbox weeks later, I realized they'd lied." After Mrs. Henderson left, I confronted my parents directly. "How many people have you stolen from?" "We haven't stolen anything," Dad insisted. "We've asked family and friends for temporary help during difficult times." "Totonafarum." "Temporary, have you paid anyone back?" Silence filled the room. Mom stared at her hands while Dad's face cycled through anger, shame, and defiance. "Dad, I need to check something. Where do you keep your financial documents?" "That's none of your business, Gary." But I was already heading toward their bedroom where they'd always kept important papers in Dad's old filing cabinet. What I found there made my blood run cold. Credit card applications with my name and social security number, some dating back 5 years. They'd opened accounts in my name, made minimum payments to keep them active, and used the available credit to fund their lifestyle and scams. My credit had been destroyed without my knowledge. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt physically sick. These weren't desperate parents making poor decisions. They were career criminals who happened to share my DNA. When I returned to the living room with the evidence, both parents broke down. Mom sobbed uncontrollably while Dad finally admitted the truth. They'd been running these scams for years, using the money to maintain their standard of living after Dad lost his sales job 3 years earlier. Jake's gambling debts were real, but the hospital emergency was completely fabricated to manipulate Amanda and me into providing quick cash. The phone call I'd overheard hadn't been about splitting money 3 ways among family members. It was Dad coordinating with Jake about how to divide the proceeds from their latest con game with Amanda and me as the unwitting victims. As I left their house that afternoon, I realized my family wasn't just dysfunctional. They were actively criminal. The 2:17 a.m. phone call had been the final straw in a pattern of abuse that stretched back decades. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free from any obligation to protect people who saw me only as a source of money to steal. Finding Jake in Las Vegas required some detective work, but Crystal's social media accounts provided enough clues to track them down. She'd been posting photos from various casinos, and her most recent check-in was at the Flamingo Hotel. I called their front desk and confirmed that Jake Reynolds was registered as a guest. When Jake answered his room phone, his voice sounded strained and exhausted, a far cry from the confident tone in his social media posts. "Gary, how did you find me here?" "We need to talk, Jake. Are you really in trouble with loan sharks, or is that another lie?" A long pause. "It's complicated, man. I mean, yeah, I'm in deep with some bad people, but it's not what Mom and Dad told you. I'm flying down there tomorrow. We're going to have an honest conversation for once in our lives." The 90-minute flight to Las Vegas gave me time to process everything I'd learned in the past 24 hours. My family's dysfunction had evolved into organized crime, with each member playing a specific role in various scams and cons. I was the outsider who'd become their primary target, the successful sibling, whose guilt and loyalty could be weaponized for financial gain. I found Jake in the Flamingo's casino bar, looking haggard and nervous. Crystal sat beside him, a petite woman with bright red hair and worried eyes. She worked as a former casino dealer who'd quit her job to help Jake, though I suspected her motives weren't entirely altruistic. "Gary, thanks for coming," Jake said without his usual cocky demeanor. "I know this looks bad, but I need you to understand what really happened." "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." Jake's story unfolded like a nightmare. He'd been gambling heavily for 2 years, starting with small poker games and escalating to high-stakes casino visits. Our parents knew about his addiction, but instead of encouraging treatment, they'd begun using his debts as opportunities for their own scams. "They've been covering my losses by stealing from relatives and friends," Jake admitted. "Every time I'd rack up serious debt, they'd come up with some emergency story to raise money from family. The motorcycle accident thing was their idea, not mine." "How much do you actually owe Jake?" $37,000 to Vincent Caruso plus interest that's compounding daily. He's not exactly the patient type. Crystal spoke up for the first time. "Vincent's guys have been calling every hour. They know about the family scam and want the full amount whether you pay or not, Gary. You're now considered part of the debt because your family used your name in their negotiations." My heart sank. By refusing to pay, I hadn't protected myself. I'd inadvertently made myself a target for people who settled disputes with violence. "Jake, did you agree to this plan to scam me and Amanda?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom and Dad promised me $10,000 if they could get $20 from you and Amanda. I was desperate, Gary. These aren't people you can just ignore and hope they go away." "What about Amanda's money? She supposedly already sent $20,000. Jake and Crystal exchanged glances. "Amanda never sent anything," Crystal said. "She needed that money to cover her own problems. Your parents have been playing all of you against each other, using each person's crisis to manipulate the others." The complexity of their scheme was breathtaking. My parents had convinced Amanda that Jake was dying, and she needed to help while simultaneously telling Jake that Amanda had already contributed and pressuring me to match her supposed generosity. In reality, no money had changed hands except for what they'd stolen through credit card fraud and neighborhood scams. "Jake, how long have Mom and Dad been running these cons?" "Honestly, years. Dad lost his sales job when his company downsized, but they never told anyone. They've been living off credit cards, reverse mortgages, and whatever they can scam from family and friends. My gambling debts just gave them a more urgent story to tell." A man in an expensive suit approached our table, and Jake's face went pale. Vincent Caruso was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of calm demeanor that suggested violence was just another business tool. "Jake, I thought we agreed you'd have progress to report by now." "Mr. Caruso, this is my brother Gary. He's here to help work something out." Vincent studied me carefully. "Your family has been very creative with payment plans, Mr. Reynolds. Unfortunately, creativity doesn't pay interest on outstanding debts." "How much does my brother actually owe you?" I asked directly. "As of this morning, $41,750. That number increases by roughly $200 per day." "And what's my involvement in this debt?" "Your parents contacted my associates claiming you were good for any shortfall in their payment plan. That makes you a guarantor in our books regardless of whether you agreed to that arrangement." The restaurant suddenly felt very small. Vincent wasn't making threats. He was simply explaining business terms with the casual tone of someone discussing weather. Crystal grabbed my hand under the table, and I could feel her trembling. "Mr. Caruso, I had no knowledge of my family's agreement and no intention of guaranteeing anyone's gambling debts. I appreciate your position, Mr. Reynolds, but intentions don't alter contractual obligations. Your family owes money, and they've represented you as a willing participant in repayment. We'll need to see significant progress within the next 48 hours." After Vincent left, Jake broke down completely. "Gary, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to get pulled into this mess, but I was scared and desperate. These people don't negotiate or grant extensions. They collect what they're owed, period." Looking at my younger brother, I saw not the spoiled golden child from our childhood, but a broken man whose addiction had spiraled beyond his control. Our parents had enabled his self-destruction while profiting from his chaos, turning family dysfunction into a criminal enterprise. But I also realized that helping Jake pay his debts would only enable the cycle to continue. Someone had to break the pattern of manipulation and consequences, even if that meant allowing my brother to face the full weight of his choices. The loan sharks now viewing me as part of the debt was a serious problem, but running away or paying them off would only validate their tactics and encourage future extortion. This situation required a different approach entirely, one that involved law enforcement and legal consequences for everyone involved. Back in Denver, I drove straight to the downtown police station with a box of evidence I'd collected: the fraudulent credit card applications, screenshots of Jake's social media posts, contradicting the hospital story records of my parents' neighborhood scams, and documentation of Amanda's workplace theft that Brad had provided. Detective Sandra Williams specialized in financial crimes and family fraud cases. She was in her early 40s with graying hair and the kind of patient demeanor that encouraged honesty from victims and witnesses. Her office walls displayed certificates from various fraud investigation courses and commendations from successful cases. Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate you coming forward with this information. Financial crimes involving family members are often the most complex because victims frequently refuse to cooperate with prosecution. I spent 2 hours detailing everything I'd discovered about my family's criminal activities. Detective Williams took notes and asked clarifying questions that revealed she understood the psychological dynamics of family manipulation. "Your situation isn't unusual," she said. "We see organized family fraud more often than people realize. What makes your case interesting is the interstate component with your brother's gambling debts in Nevada." Detective Williams, am I legally responsible for Jake's debts to these loan sharks? Absolutely not. Verbal agreements made by third parties without your knowledge or consent have no legal standing. However, the threat to your safety is real and actionable. We'll need to coordinate with Las Vegas Metro Police to address the criminal extortion. She pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on her desk. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to share something with you. We've been investigating your parents for 3 months. My stomach dropped. 3 months! Mrs. Chen, your parents' neighbor, filed a fraud report in September after discovering your parents had lied about needing money for medical expenses. When we started investigating, we found a pattern of similar complaints going back over a year." Detective Williams opened the file, revealing police reports from multiple victims: the Johnsons, the Malloys, 3 elderly members of my parents' church, 2 of Dad's former co-workers, and even my high school guidance counselor, who'd been told my parents needed help with funeral expenses for a relative who was actually alive and well. The total confirmed theft amounts to $63,000 from 14 different victims. We've been building a case, but we needed more evidence to establish intent and pattern. Your refusal to pay the $20,000 actually helped break the case open." "How did my refusal help?" "It forced them to accelerate their timeline and make mistakes. When their planned score fell through, they started approaching victims more aggressively and with less credible stories. Mrs. Johnson called us when your parents asked her for money to help with your supposed cancer treatment. I felt sick. They told people I had cancer. Among other things. The more desperate they became, the more elaborate their lies grew. Yesterday's phone call to you was likely their final attempt at a major score before disappearing with whatever money they'd accumulated." Detective Williams explained that my parents had been planning to flee the country. They'd applied for expedited passports and booked flights to Costa Rica for the following week. The $20,000 from me and Amanda would have provided enough cash for them to disappear before criminal charges could be filed. What about Amanda's workplace theft? We're coordinating with her employer and the district attorney's office. The real estate company has been cooperating fully since discovering the embezzlement. Amanda's theft totals $47,300 over 6 months. And Jake's situation in Las Vegas. We've contacted Metro Police and the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. The loan shark operation your brother's involved with is under federal investigation for interstate racketeering. Your brother's debts may actually help prosecutors build their case against the criminal organization. The scope of law enforcement involvement was staggering. What had started as a simple family dispute had revealed multiple ongoing criminal investigations spanning several states and federal agencies. Detective Williams, what happens now? We'll arrest your parents tomorrow morning on fraud charges. Amanda will be arrested at her workplace for embezzlement. Your brother will need to cooperate with federal investigators in Las Vegas, but his willingness to testify could result in significantly reduced charges. Well, what about the threats from the loan sharks? That's federal extortion, and the FBI takes those cases very seriously. Your family's documentation of Vincent Caruso's threats will help prosecutors, but you'll need protective measures until the organized crime sweep is completed. She handed me business cards for a victim's advocate, a credit restoration specialist, and a federal prosecutor who would be handling the interstate aspects of the case. Mr. Reynolds, I know this is overwhelming, but your decision to seek help instead of paying has likely prevented your parents from victimizing dozens more people. These schemes typically escalate until someone intervenes. That evening, I called Lisa from my apartment and explained everything. She listened without interrupting, occasionally gasping at particularly shocking revelations. Gary, I'm so proud of you for going to the police. I know this can't be easy. It's not, but I keep thinking about Mrs. Chen and the other elderly neighbors my parents stole from. These people trusted them and got robbed for their kindness. What happens next? Detective Williams wants me to be present tomorrow when they arrest my parents. She thinks my presence might encourage them to cooperate rather than continue lying. Do you want me to come with you for support? Actually, yes. I think I'm going to need all the emotional support I can get. As I prepared for bed that night, I received a text from an unknown number. Your family situation has been resolved. No further action required. VC. Vincent Caruso had apparently learned about the federal investigation and decided to cut his losses rather than risk additional scrutiny from law enforcement. The FBI's organized crime task force moved faster than anyone had expected, and Jake's debt had become irrelevant overnight when the entire loan shark operation was shut down. For the first time in 48 hours, I slept peacefully, knowing that the cycle of manipulation and fraud that had defined my family for years was finally coming to an end. The next morning, Detective Williams arranged for me to be present when uniformed officers arrested my parents at their home. Lisa sat beside me in the police car, squeezing my hand as we watched the scene unfold through their living room window. Mom answered the door in her bathrobe, and her face went white when she saw the badges. Dad appeared behind her, already dressed as if he'd been expecting this moment. The officers read them their rights with professional efficiency, while neighbors gathered on their front lawns to witness the spectacle. Inside the police station, Detective Williams led my parents to separate interrogation rooms. She asked me to wait in the observation area, where I could watch through one-way glass as they were questioned. Your presence here sends a message, she explained. They need to understand that their primary victim is cooperating fully with our investigation. Dad went first. He maintained his innocent act for exactly 12 minutes before the weight of evidence broke his resolve. When Detective Williams presented bank records showing the money trail from various scams, he finally admitted to borrowing money from neighbors and friends during financial difficulties. Mr. Reynolds' borrowing implies intention to repay. Can you document any instance where you returned money to these victims? We were planning to pay everyone back once our situation improved. Your situation was improving through additional fraud, not legitimate income. You've been unemployed for 3 years but told victims you needed short-term help with temporary setbacks. I've been looking for work. The job market is terrible for people my age. Detective Williams placed photos of passport applications on the table. These expedited passport requests and plane tickets to Costa Rica suggest you were planning to flee the country, not repay debts. Dad's shoulders sagged as he realized the futility of continued lies. I never meant for things to go this far. It started small, just asking for help with bills, but people kept offering money and we kept accepting. What about the credit cards opened in your son Gary's name? That was different. Gary has a good job and excellent credit. We knew he could handle those payments better than we could. Did Gary give you permission to use his name and social security number? Not explicitly, but we're family. We figured he'd understand if we explained the situation. The casual way Dad justified identity theft was chilling. In his mind, being related to someone granted automatic permission to steal their financial identity and destroy their credit rating. Mom's interrogation was more emotional, but equally revealing. She broke down immediately when shown evidence of the neighborhood scams, sobbing about how desperate they'd become after Dad lost his job. Mrs. Reynolds, your husband's unemployment doesn't justify lying to elderly neighbors about fake medical emergencies. We didn't think of it as lying. We really did need help, and people seemed happy to contribute when they thought it was for a good cause. Stealing someone's money by claiming you have cancer when you're perfectly healthy is fraud, not creative fundraising. We never said I had cancer specifically. We just mentioned medical expenses and let people draw their own conclusions. Detective Williams presented recordings of phone calls where Mom explicitly claimed to have breast cancer and needed money for chemotherapy treatments. The recordings came from Mrs. Johnson, who'd become suspicious and started documenting their requests. Mrs. Reynolds, this is your voice telling Mrs. Johnson that you're starting chemotherapy next week and need help with medication costs. Mom's face crumpled as she listened to her own lies played back in the sterile police interview room. I was scared. We were about to lose the house and Gary wouldn't help us. Amanda has her own problems and Jake owes money to dangerous people. So you decided to solve your family's financial problems by stealing from elderly neighbors and destroying your son Gary's credit. We thought if we could just get enough money together, we could fix everything and pay everyone back with interest. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. After both interrogations, Detective Williams brought my parents together in a conference room, where I waited with Lisa and Attorney Martinez, the lawyer I'd hired to represent my interests in the criminal proceedings. When my parents saw me, Mom immediately burst into tears and reached for me. Gary, thank God you're here. Please tell them this is all a misunderstanding. We're family and families help each other through difficult times. I stayed seated, making no move to comfort her. Mom, you stole my identity and destroyed my credit rating. You lied to neighbors about having cancer. You coordinated with Jake to scam money from me and Amanda by claiming he was dying in a hospital. That's not family helping family, that's organized criminal fraud. Dad tried his usual intimidation tactics. Gary, if you cooperate with these charges against your own parents, don't expect to be welcome in this family anymore. I haven't been welcome in this family for 28 years, Dad. The only difference now is that I'm finally admitting it. Detective Williams placed a comprehensive plea agreement on the table. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, the district attorney, is prepared to offer reduced sentences in exchange for full cooperation with our investigation and complete restitution to all victims. What does that mean exactly? Dad asked. Guilty pleas to multiple fraud charges, 5 years probation instead of prison time, and a payment plan to repay the $63,000 stolen from neighbors plus $24,000 in damages to your son's credit rating. Attorney Martinez leaned forward. My client Gary Reynolds will also be filing civil suits for identity theft, credit damage, and emotional distress. Those proceedings are separate from criminal charges. Mom looked desperately between me and the detective. Gary, you can't let them put us in prison. We're your parents. You stopped being my parents the moment you decided to treat me like a victim instead of a son. Dad tried one final manipulation. Gary, think about what this will do to the family reputation. Amanda's kids will suffer if their grandparents have criminal records. Amanda's kids will suffer more if their mother goes to prison for embezzlement and their uncle gets killed by loan sharks. Someone has to break this cycle of crime and manipulation. The plea negotiations continued for 3 hours. Both parents eventually agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, including providing complete financial records and victim lists. They would plead guilty to organized fraud charges, serve no jail time in exchange for 5 years supervised probation, and begin immediate restitution payments. One more thing. Detective Williams said. "We found documents suggesting you've been collecting inheritance payments intended for Gary from your deceased mother-in-law. Those forgeries constitute additional felony charges, unless you sign ownership of those funds over immediately." I'd forgotten about Grandma Helen's will. She'd always favored me among her grandchildren and had apparently left me a substantial inheritance. My parents had been intercepting and cashing those checks for 3 years, forging my signature on legal documents. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Detective Williams consulted her notes. $67,400 in inheritance payments, plus accumulated interest and penalties for the fraudulent signatures. Attorney Martinez smiled. "That inheritance recovery combined with the civil settlement will more than compensate for the credit damage and emotional distress our client has suffered." As we left the police station that afternoon, both parents were processed into the county jail system for booking and fingerprinting before being released on their own recognizance pending formal sentencing. Amanda had been arrested at her workplace and would face separate charges for embezzlement. Jake called from Las Vegas that evening to report that Vincent Caruso and his entire organization had been arrested in coordinated federal raids. The Loan Shark operation was part of a larger racketeering investigation that had been ongoing for 18 months. "Gary, I can't believe this is all happening so fast. The FBI wants me to testify against Vincent and his guys in exchange for immunity from prosecution." "What about your gambling addiction, Jake?" "I'm checking into a residential treatment program next week. Crystal's been researching facilities, and there's one in Colorado Springs that specializes in gambling addiction with underlying family trauma issues." For the first time in our adult lives, Jake sounded genuinely humble and committed to change. The shock of nearly being killed over gambling debts had apparently penetrated his denial about the severity of his addiction. "Jake, I hope you stick with the program this time. Our family needs at least one person to break the cycle of dysfunction." "I know, man. I'm sorry for everything. I never realized how much our parents screwed you over until I saw it from the outside looking in." As I hung up the phone, Lisa wrapped her arms around me from behind. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Relieved, exhausted, angry, sad, pretty much every emotion possible." "Do you regret going to the police?" "Not for a second. My family needed consequences, not another enabler. Maybe now they'll actually change instead of just promising to change." The legal proceedings would continue for months, but the immediate crisis was over. My family's criminal enterprise had been dismantled, and everyone involved would face appropriate consequences for their actions. Most importantly, I was finally free from the manipulation and guilt trips that had controlled my life since childhood. 6 months later, my life looked completely different than it had on that early morning when my phone rang with my mother's fabricated emergency. The legal proceedings had concluded with satisfactory results for everyone, except the perpetrators of the various crimes. My parents were serving their 5-year probation sentences and making monthly restitution payments to their victims. Dad had found part-time work at a hardware store, while Mom took a job as a receptionist at a dental office. They'd moved from their house to a small apartment in Thornton, downsizing their lifestyle to match their legitimate income for the first time in years. Amanda completed a plea agreement that included full restitution to her employer, 18 months of supervised probation, and mandatory participation in a gambling addiction treatment program. Her marriage to Brad survived the crisis, strengthened by her commitment to honesty and recovery. She'd written me a heartfelt letter of apology, acknowledging years of participation in family manipulation and expressing genuine remorse for her actions. Jake successfully completed his 90-day residential treatment program at the Colorado Springs facility and had been clean from gambling for 4 months. He found work as a server at a restaurant in Boulder and was slowly rebuilding his life without the constant drama and schemes that had defined his previous existence. Most importantly, he'd cut off contact with enablers and gambling associates, focusing instead on developing healthy relationships and coping strategies. My credit score had been fully restored thanks to the identity theft protections and the recovered inheritance money from Grandma Helen. The financial compensation from civil settlements against my family exceeded $112,000, which I'd invested in a diversified portfolio recommended by a financial advisor who specialized in fraud recovery cases. Lisa and I had grown closer through the crisis, and her unwavering support during the darkest moments had convinced me that she was someone I wanted to build a future with. We'd moved in together, and I'd started shopping for engagement rings, planning a proposal for Christmas morning. The most unexpected development was my involvement with a support group for family fraud victims. Detective Williams had connected me with an organization that helped people who'd been financially abused by relatives, and I'd discovered that my story wasn't unique. Hundreds of families across Colorado dealt with similar patterns of manipulation, theft, and emotional blackmail disguised as love and loyalty. I began speaking at their monthly meetings, sharing my experience, and encouraging other victims to set boundaries and seek help. Many people struggled with the guilt of potentially sending family members to prison, and I could relate to those feelings while explaining why accountability was essential for everyone's healing. The hardest lesson I learned, I told a room full of fraud victims last month, is that enabling destructive behavior isn't love. It's cowardice disguised as loyalty. Real love requires courage to do the right thing, even when it's painful. One woman raised her hand. How do you deal with other family members who think you're cruel for pressing charges against your parents? I remind them that my parents' victims were also someone's family members. Mrs. Chen is 81 years old and lost her medication money to my parents' cancer scam. The Johnsons are retired teachers who gave my parents $3,000 they couldn't afford to lose. My job isn't to protect criminals from consequences. It's to protect innocent people from becoming victims. The psychological healing was slower than the financial recovery, but I was making progress with a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Patricia Morgan helped me understand that my role as the family scapegoat had prepared me to resist manipulation in ways my siblings couldn't. Your parents chose you as their primary target because you were emotionally independent, she explained during one of our sessions. They knew Jake and Amanda would participate in schemes rather than risk losing their approval, but you were always harder to control. I used to think being the outsider in my family was a weakness. It was actually your greatest strength. The emotional distance you maintained protected you from being fully indoctrinated into their criminal thinking patterns. Lisa had started attending some of my therapy sessions to better understand the family dynamics that had shaped my personality. She was amazed by the complexity of the manipulation tactics my parents had used throughout my childhood. I never realized how calculated their favoritism was, she said after one particularly revealing session. They deliberately created insecurity and competition between you and your siblings to maintain control. The crazy thing is how normal it seemed while it was happening. I thought all families operated with constant drama and financial emergencies. That's the insidious nature of family abuse, Dr. Morgan observed. Children have no reference point for healthy relationships, so they assume their experience is universal. My relationship with Jake had evolved into something resembling actual brotherhood for the first time in our lives. He called regularly to share updates about his recovery and ask for advice about rebuilding his life. The dynamic between us was completely different without our parents orchestrating competition and resentment. Gary, I need to ask you something, he said during one of our phone conversations. How did you resist Mom and Dad's manipulation for so many years? I fell for every guilt trip and sob story they ever invented. Honestly, Jake, I think I was just too angry to be effectively manipulated. When someone treats you like garbage for 25 years, you stop caring about their approval. I wish I'd figured that out sooner. I wasted so much time trying to be their perfect son while they were setting me up to fail. The important thing is that you figured it out before it killed you. Vincent Caruso's guys weren't playing games. I know. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you'd paid that $20,000. They probably would have asked for more money 6 months later with some new emergency. He was right. Paying the ransom would have validated their tactics and encouraged escalation. Every successful manipulation taught them that their strategies worked, and victims would eventually cave under sufficient pressure. The police investigation had revealed that my parents planned to disappear permanently after collecting enough money from their final round of scams. They'd researched countries without extradition treaties and consulted with people who specialized in helping criminals establish new identities abroad. My refusal to cooperate hadn't just saved me $20,000. It had prevented them from successfully fleeing justice entirely. Mrs. Chen, my parents' elderly neighbor, who had first reported their fraud, had become an unlikely friend. She often invited me for Sunday dinners and treated me like the grandson she'd never had. Her kindness helped heal some of the emotional wounds left by my parents' rejection and abuse. "Gary, dear, I hope you understand that your parents' behavior reflects their character, not your worth as a person," she said during one of our visits. "Any parent would be proud to have a son with your integrity and courage." Those words meant more to me than any approval I'd ever sought from my biological family. Mrs. Chen's unconditional acceptance showed me what healthy family relationships actually looked like. As I reflected on the past 6 months, I realized that the 2:17 a.m. phone call had been a gift disguised as a crisis. It forced me to choose between continuing decades of enabling or finally standing up for myself and innocent victims. The decision to hang up and go back to sleep wasn't callous. It was the first healthy boundary I'd ever set with my family. Everything that followed from the police investigation to the criminal charges to my recovery and growth stemmed from that single moment of refusing to participate in manipulation. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is allow them to face the consequences of their choices instead of shielding them from reality. The experience taught me that family isn't defined by blood relationships, but by mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. My chosen family now included Lisa Mrs. Chen, my therapy support group, and the few relatives like Jake who'd committed to growth and change. The legal system had provided justice for my parents' victims, but personal healing required forgiveness boundaries and the courage to build new relationships based on healthy principles. I'd discovered that breaking cycles of abuse isn't cruel. It's an act of love that protects future generations from repeating the same destructive patterns. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts and value my own judgment over other people's opinions, especially when those people had demonstrated they didn't have my best interests at heart. The phone call that woke me up at 2:17 a.m. had actually been a wake-up call, in the deepest sense marking the beginning of my real life as an independent adult who refused to be manipulated by anyone, regardless of our relationship. Now, as I write this story, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind since sharing these experiences with others. Have you ever found yourself making excuses for family members whose behavior crosses clear moral boundaries? Sometimes we convince ourselves that loyalty means protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. But I've learned that true love requires the courage to do what's right, even when it's painful. What's your experience with setting boundaries in difficult family relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or helped you see your own family dynamics from a different perspective, please like this video and consider subscribing for more content about overcoming family dysfunction and building healthier relationships. Sharing this video might also help someone in your life who's struggling with similar manipulation or abuse. Thank you for listening to my story and allowing me to share what I've learned about the difference between enabling and loving. I hope it encourages you to trust your instincts, set healthy boundaries, and never apologize for protecting yourself and others from people who see kindness as weakness to exploit. Take care of yourselves, and remember that you deserve relationships built on respect and genuine care.